Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 184. It's part 2 of A Stranger in Goldenlode, and I hope you're enjoying it. And here we go. He drank a few more and had a meal at the Big Nugget. He spent most of the time thinking over everything he had learned about Richard Dunning. In the end, he came to one conclusion. Dunning was a question mark. He'd never met and talked with any stranger in town that stayed a question mark. That question mark would have to be erased. He paid and walked back to his house. He waited a couple of hours, then took a lantern and went back to the Big Nugget. He kept it shuttered until he was behind it and near Dunning's horses. They weren't too spooked by him, which was good. He gave them a once-over, but didn't see anything unusual about them. Then he turned his focus on the wagon. He looked at it from every angle. There were 2 large boxes on the back, but they were padlock closed, and he didn't have any tools to open them. He wasn't even sure he would if he had them. He also finally decided what was wrong with the wagon. Its deck was too deep. There had to be some secret to it, a secret compartment. Certainly it couldn't be solid wood, or the wagon would be so heavy that 2 horses wouldn't move it. But its secret was destined to say so. Try as he might, Sam couldn't find any hint of an opening, lock, hinges, door, any other way into the wagon's base. He looked for the better part of an hour. When he thought he heard someone walking nearby, he decided it was time to close his lantern and take a circuitous route back home. A secret compartment built into a wagon didn't mean too much. Anyone with any wealth who wanted to make it alone through this empty land safely might do the same. Still, it told Sam that his new question mark had secrets. Back at his home, he cleaned his pistol, which was his habit, and went to sleep, still thinking on what he would need to do in the morning. The morning brought clouds and spits of rain. The desert saw rain only rarely, though this was the time of year it started. The sandy dirt was thrown up in little spurts by the large drops. He took his time with breakfast, knowing that the bankers kept bankers' hours. His first stop were the few other places where a person new to town could find a bed that wasn't the Big Nugget. They weren't inns, just a few houses that had an extra room where, if a stranger asked around, they could find where there was a dry spot to rent. The owners of these places knew which side their bread was buttered on. They would all give Sam the information he asked for without expecting payment in return. He confirmed that no one else knew had come to town. Then he made his way to his employer, the First Western Bank. The manager was Fred Shaw. He was a big man, tall and overweight. Though he was never seen in public drunk, Sam had noticed over the years that Fred's nose was blooming with broken blood vessels. He suspected he was lonely and drank to get through the nights. But he greeted Sam with a hearty hello, one hand automatically going through his thinning hair. "Sam, on the case I take it. This will be about Mr. Dunning, will it not?" "That's right, Fred." He took the seat across from Fred's desk. Fred's office, such as it was, had no full walls separating it from the rest of the bank. A half wall, about chest height, delineated it. Fred did not believe in blocking himself away from his employees or his clients. It did make Sam's work somewhat delicate, as he had to talk about some ticklish issues at times. "I understand you met him yesterday?" "Yes, he came by not too long before closing." "Yeah, I met him as well at the Nugget." Fred nodded. "On top of it as usual. What do you want to know?" "Why did he come by here?" "To ask about the town. He let me know he's an undertaker, and he's seeing if Goldenlode has a spot for his business." "What exactly did you tell him?" "I let him know the population, the general situation. Maybe an undertaker could make it here if it were still the rush days. Lots of fights, fair number of deaths, more people. But if everyone lives their normal lives out, I don't think Goldenlode could handle a second one. John Manor does okay, but even he has his woodworking on the side to make ends meet." "That's roughly what I told him. Funny. He talked to me later than you, yet he asked me if we even had an undertaker." "Yeah, maybe he thought I hadn't given him the straight poop." Sam shook his head. I'm not sure what's going on with Dunning, but I'm going to keep an eye on him. You think he's up to something? I think he raises my hackles a bit, and until I'm sure about him, I'm going to stay on him. Well, that's what we pay you for. Sam knew Fred was using we in a protective sense. The real owners of the bank lived in New York. They had decided that the local sheriff wasn't doing enough to protect their interests and had, through some contacts, hired Sam. When Sam rode into town, he was already a First Western employee. Still, he didn't argue the we, as he knew Fred must have been a little rankled at being told his job from people 2,000 miles away. Besides, Fred now treated him square, no matter how they had started. And I'm glad you do. Not to mention that I appreciate the help you give me, Fred. Unless there's anything else? Fred shook his head, so Sam rose and stretched his hand out over the desk to shake Fred's hand again. I'll keep you informed if there's anything more to Dunning. Thanks. And I doubt he'll have much business with us, but if he makes any big moves, I'll get you in on the loop. Thank you, Fred. When he left the bank, he turned in the direction of the big nugget. He saw out of the corner of his eye movement. He turned and saw a rat's tail disappear behind the nearest building, the general store. Sam thought back. He couldn't remember seeing a rat since the height of the gold rush. Then there were so many people, many camping right here in town, that there was food and trash everywhere. The rats had loved it. As the rush had subsided, the rats had found fewer and fewer pickings. Between that and the cats of the town, they had nearly been wiped out, though not, it seemed, entirely. He walked into the general store. It was owned by a family, the Robinsons, who had done extremely well for themselves during the rush, selling supplies to hopeful miners. That business of selling mostly simple mining and camping equipment gradually turned into the first general store in town. They'd become quite wealthy, but insisted on hiring no one outside their family members. They were respected in the town, but not loved. Mrs. Robinson, he said as he entered, seeing it was she behind the counter. Sam Lockart, she said. Sam had always gotten the strong impression that she didn't much like him personally, but she approved of the bank having someone around specifically to watch for strangers and make sure any bad eggs left right away. So she put up with him. What can I do for you? Just giving a heads up, Sam said. I saw a rat behind your store a second ago. I also saw one near the Nugget the other night. Don't know if it's the same one. Her face turned sour. The last thing we need, she said. But, thank you. I'll make sure our cat's on the job, and I'll have my son find the old rat traps. Hopefully they haven't rusted away to nothing. I wish I could bring you better news, Sam said. Good day. Good day, she said. It was already turning to go to the back room of the store. When he stepped outside, he heard her calling for her son to come help her. Sam went straight to the big Nugget. Tom Printon, who had always been a hard worker, was in the big front room seeing to two guests who had wanted breakfast. He did not see Richard Dunning. Tom, may I have a word? He asked, and walked over to sit on the first stool at the bar. Sure, he replied in his gravel but friendly voice. Be right there. Soon he finished up and walked up to Sam. What can I do for you this fine morning, Sam? Sam leaned forward conspiratorially. He didn't want to say what he had to say out loud so it would carry to the guests. Tom took the hint and leaned forward in return. Yesterday evening, I saw a rat in your stable, and then, just a few minutes ago, I saw one behind the general store. Damnation, Tom said in a whisper. We haven't had to worry about those for a while. I was wondering what the secrecy was about, but thank you. Of course, Sam said. Has Richard Dunning come down? He did, Tom said, straightening up a bit and bringing his voice to normal level. First thing this morning. Had another cup of tea, then left a while ago. Did he say where he was going? Talk to you at all? Nothing beyond the pleasantries, Tom said. So he's out and about already, Sam thought. Man likes to keep busy. The rain started up again, and Sam considered what to do. He didn't want to wander around looking for Dunning in the wet. It was really too early for lunch, but he had time now and might be very busy the rest of the day depending on what happened. He asked Tom for eggs and toast and a pour-over coffee. Most people made coffee with percolators, but they burned the coffee rather badly and got even worse when allowed to sit on the stove. Tom had picked up the trick of pouring hot water over the beans, making coffee that took more work but tasted a hell of a lot better. Sam, having seen him do it and tasting the difference, had even started doing it at home when he felt like taking the extra time and effort. It was details like that kept the big nugget going through good times and bad. Other full-ins had opened during their rush, but none of them had survived the post-rush crash, other than Tom and his nugget. He hadn't been the cheapest place in town, but he'd always been the cleanest. Sam knew that Tom would be glad for the information about the rats, even if he didn't want to hear it. And given how many new people in town came through the nugget, and therefore how important the nugget was to Sam's job, he was happy to help him in any way he could. If Dunning was true to his word, he'd be stopping by John Manor to talk shop. Though it wasn't always a bad idea to let people know he had an eye on them, that didn't apply here. Dunning knew Sam and his business already. No, he wanted to get as much information as he could from John Manor, and that could only be done by letting him have his talk. He might just go there later, but he suspected that Gabe would be tailing Dunning, and hopefully would come by the Big Nugget sometime and give a report. Sam settled down to wait. And that's the episode for this time. I hope you're enjoying it. Obviously, there's more to this story. We'll get more next episode. And until then, have a good week, and thanks for listening. Words of music, copyright 2020, CryptoBiography, LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.